My name is Barb Atwell. I am facilitating the oral history of Genie Stowers. It's September 10th, 2022, and this is a project with the Berkeley Friends Meeting, sponsored by the Outreach and Nurture Committee. I'm so pleased to see so many people here, especially Carol and Nelson from Pennsylvania and Gail from up north in Washington. So we will get started. We're going to take a break about halfway through. I'm just so tickled that you could be here. And I'm so happy to introduce Genie. We'll take it away.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. I have to say I'm very nervous about this, and so we'll just see how it goes. I went back and forth about whether I wanted to do it, whether I felt like I had, how much to share and how much, not to share. And I think I've figured out a way that I'm comfortable with. And I decided I was going to do it a bit different than I think I've seen other people do, and that I'm going to give a more or less brief chronology of my life, and then I'm going to go back and kind of go through themes, like events in my life that were turning points, my spiritual path, my path as an activist, and then just kind of finish up with things I like. I'll talk about my career, my professional career, and then like things I like. And then throughout, I have some images, some pictures, some slides to show, to illustrate what I'm doing. So to begin with just a chronology, I was born in 1957. I turned 65 this year. I was born in Huntington, West Virginia, in Huntington, but we were from a little town outside called Ceredo. And this is at the western part of West Virginia, right where Kentucky and Ohio and West Virginia come together, at the Ohio River. And the little town next to us is actually called Canova for Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia. My dad's family had been in that area for a while. My mother was actually born in rural Virginia, out in the mountains, but moved into town, into Ceredo, during the Depression, and she was raised by her grandmother and her aunt. So they had all been in Ceredo in that area for quite a while. But we didn't live there very long. My father was in the Navy, and he had managed to be stationed in West Virginia in the Huntington area on recruiting duty. But soon after, a year after I was born, we got shipped to Athens, Georgia, and then Jacksonville, Florida. And then when I was 3, we moved to Norfolk, Virginia. And Norfolk is like an enormous naval base almost. There's like 4 or 5 very big bases there. And my father was on like 3 or 4 aircraft carriers, and then he would travel around all those bases. Well, let me skip back to some more context about my family. So my dad was one of 9 siblings. He served in the Navy during World War II. He left then after the war, and he became a barber. And then during the Korean War, he went back in and stayed in until 72. So he spent a total of 31 years in the Navy. The area that I was born in was so Stowers oriented. I recently found, and just looking at Google Map, there's actually a holler called the Stowers Holler, and my uncle and aunt had lived there. And a holler, for people who don't know, is a very narrow kind of valley where very poor people live, basically, just up in the mountains, up in the hills. His dad ran trolleys and then drove buses. And as was typical for many families at the time, most of his brothers went into the military He was the only one who kind of stayed, though. And this was our entrance into the middle class. If my aunts and uncles, and then my cousins are still, many of them, what would be called, working class. But because my dad was in the Navy, and then my mother went to what was then derogatorily called night school, and I say that because that's basically what I teach, is at night for working adults. She went back and became a teacher. And so together, we were able to travel a lot, and do a lot of different things that my cousins never really had the opportunity to do. But the result was I never really grew up around my cousins. And I've only really gotten to know some of them actually on Facebook. And we found each other and have communicated, as adults, basically. So my mother was born way out in the hills and mountains of Virginia as a child. So, like, many years after she was born, to get to where she was born, we either had to ford a river or cross a walking bridge, that like moved as you walked out. That's how far out they were. But when the Great Depression hit, her father died the same day that my youngest uncle was born. And then the Depression hit sometime later. Her mother couldn't afford to take care of all the kids, so she was sent into the big city to be taken care of. And that's why she was raised by my grandmother and my great aunt. So she, as a teacher, she started teaching in West Virginia. And as she said it was a very political situation. If you had political connections, you could get a teaching job. And so evidently she did have political connections. But what she had, she got a job, and her first teaching job was in a one-room schoolhouse way out in the country. And she lived with one of the families. And that was the job that she got. And then she went on and she taught school for about 35 years in the variety of places that we lived. Um, let's see, other things. My great grandmother, who raised my mom, was a milliner in that very small town. So one thing I remember about their house, there was always hats around and all kinds of material around. And her daughter, my great aunt, who was like my grandmother, and one of the people I feel helped me get through my life, basically. Her name was Nellie. That's actually, for those of you who know my legal name, I'm named after her. And so my name is Nell after her, Lou after my father's middle name, Lucian, and then Jean after a family friend. But I was never called Nellie, and I never wanted to change my name out of respect for my great aunt. And her grandfather was the first minister in the Baptist church that's right across the street from the house that they grew up with. So, the family was very religious, very Baptist. I remember as a kid, their yard was filled with beautiful flowers. My aunt was, an incredible gardener. And every Sunday she would make a flower arrangement for the church. Um, let's see, I wanted to say a few things about being in a Navy family, basically. You don't have a lot of control over your life. You have, in the Navy, you usually are in one place for 2 years. You shift from shore duty to sea duty, like your dad does or your mom does. But at the time I was a kid, it was all my dad. And I was lucky, though, that in Norfolk, like I said, my dad moved from base to base himself, and we were able to stay in the same place. And then he was on various ships. He was always on aircraft carriers, which were enormous ships. Like today, there are like 6,000 people on a ship. His ships at the time were much smaller. But it's a very patriarchal kind of existence. You are basically your father's or your mother's rank. So at one point, I was going to a Navy school, and everybody knew what everybody else's parents' ranks were, and that was came kind of the hierarchy, in class and stuff. Whatever your dad was, and people, you ended up learning to defer to people whose dads were higher up. If you got into trouble or something, like later when I was a teenager, I got into trouble on one of the bases we lived at. They never came to me. They went to my father and said it was going to go on his record if I didn't straighten out. And so it's very serious. You have to learn to do things literally the Navy way. I mean, things that I don't think twice of. Other people would probably think we're really weird, but if you are on base, at taps at dusk, or at daybreak, everybody stops and salutes the flag as it's going up or down. One base I was at, the one where I was getting into trouble, one reason I was getting into trouble is that the base captain, who lived across the street from us, had told us that kids weren't allowed any place except the bowling alley. So everything else was off limits to us. So we had nothing to do, except bowl. And the video games there. So, they can basically control everything you do. Events, like when kids go and look at Christmas lights and stuff, my earliest memories of doing that are going to the submarine base, because the submarines and the Navy ships all got decorated by the sailors with Christmas lights and stuff. And so we would go out and drive back and forth in front of the submarines, and look at the Christmas lights. I just want to add, because I think it has, there's a lot of context here, but I am going to go, let's see. Okay. I am going to show some of the pictures I've got now. Just a few of them first. Okay. So these are some pictures of me. The one to the left is, I'm the one, the shorter one. I'm an only child. Like I said, my dad was one of 9. My mother was one of 3, but I was an only child. And when we lived in Norfolk, this picture's taken in Norfolk, my next door neighbor also was an only child, and there was only 21 days apart in our birthdays. And so our parents often, for some reason, they dressed us alike. You can see we have the same book bags, except the color is different. And we would get like the same birthday presents. And I think as an adult, one thing, Cindy's dad died when we were 7. And I think partly my parents were buying some of the gifts and stuff, and that's why we would get the same stuff. But she and I were friends. We were like sisters, and we were friends. She died about 5 years ago, but we were friends until she died. These other 2 pictures are from Puerto Rico, and I was there from when I was in 6th grade to 8th grade, and one of the pictures is we lived on base in Puerto Rico. In the Navy, you live on a naval base. You live according to your family's rank, your father's rank. And my father was what's called a warrant officer. He was what's called a Mustang. He started out as an enlisted person, and then he worked his way up to be an officer, but a junior officer. So we lived among the junior officers. And my friend here in Girl Scouts, she lived in enlisted housing, like apartments, but for people who were enlisted. So I lived among like people who had young children and stuff. So this is our little next door neighbor here. These are my parents at their wedding. These are my mother with Gabriella, Marissa's and my daughter, who was adopted in 1998. This is my father in his Navy uniform. You can see, well, you can't see that well, but he was, kind of very traditionally middle class. He was a mason, he was a Shriner, all the things that kind of middle class men did, in the Midwest and the South. You probably can't see his hand is on his officer's sword. And this is a picture of him in San Juan, in Puerto Rico with our little next door neighbor. I don't actually have very many pictures of my dad. And my relationship with my father was very difficult. He could be very abusive, and our family, our family was basically an abusive family. From time to time he drank a lot. He was not very happy when he wasn't very happy. So he and I had a fraught relationship, shall we say. This was my great aunt, and like I said, she is the person who, no matter what, I was okay with her, no matter what. I think she lived an amazing life. Some people might find a little bit of this problematic, but she said to me once, I mean, these people are all Appalachian, right? They're all from Appalachia. She said, my father, or maybe she said, my grandfather was shot through the eye by an Indian arrow, and I lived to see a man on the moon. And I just thought that was amazing to really hear how far her life had gone, how much she had seen during her lifetime. She also said to me once, in high school, I said something to her about I'm a feminist. And she says, well, that's fine, that you're a feminist. And then she said, what's a feminist? And I just thought, that is wonderful. That said to me, no matter what I was, she was fine with that, and I think everybody needs somebody like that for whom they're okay no matter what happens. And I just adored her. If you're ever at our house, you'll see these Afghans all over the place. She crocheted all the time, even when at age 90 she was legally blind. She would do it by touch, or she had a magnifying glass, and she died at 99 with her mind fully intact. Actually, it was really kind of amazing. Okay, this one I'm going to start for my next section. So we lived in Norfolk until 1968, and one thing I want to try to do is provide some historical context for all of this. I was in Norfolk during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Norfolk, again, is surrounded by 10 to 15 major military bases, the largest bases on the East Coast. My father was on an aircraft carrier, and he and many, the fathers of many of my friends, because in Norfolk, people didn't tend to live on base. They lived out in the city. They all left, and were part of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile blockade. I was in kindergarten at the time, and I remember, even though now it seems ridiculous, we had drills about, oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to stop sharing. Thank you, from Rich for reminding me. So we had drills, and my kindergarten was in a church. We would go in the choir room and like hide behind the choir robes. And that was like supposed to keep us safe, from, in the middle of what was undoubtedly one of the biggest targets on the East Coast. So I think even as kids, we realized that was really ridiculous. But that's what people did. The other thing about Norfolk that was significant is that until fifth grade, I went to segregated schools. Schools had not yet integrated in the South. And my last year there in fifth grade, what Norfolk started doing is they moved the teachers around. So in fifth grade, I had an African American teacher. And then we got shipped to Puerto Rico. And that next year, they started busing kids around. And that's when Norfolk, like many other cities in the South and the North, were had a lot of unrest. In fact, one of my friends in Puerto Rico who was African American, her family in the early 70s moved to Boston because they thought they would escape all the problems with integration. And of course, Boston had riots, where whites from South Boston and other places, rioted against blacks coming to their schools. I love being in Norfolk and having some stability, but then I loved Puerto Rico. We lived in part of San Juan called Bayamon. I was in grades 6 to 8 there. I went to a Navy school on base that was actually a really good school. And it was incredibly diverse with, people from the military, federal employees, kids from, of federal employees, and lots of civilian employees who were Puerto Rican. So, went from a very segregated area to a tremendously diverse environment. But this was the period of the Vietnam War, and we didn't see a lot of that, but there was a lot of like what you might call hippie activity, and marijuana, a lot of pot around, a lot of pot smoking, a lot of the beginning of a lot of political activity. While we were there, Puerto Ricans were engaged in big issues about what they thought should be done with Puerto Rico. The independentistas wanted to break off from the U.S. altogether, and there was a group of people who wanted to have Puerto Rico be a state, and then others who wanted to keep it as a commonwealth. And there were days when we were not allowed off base because of the violence. While we were there, American businesses were bombed. I remember it must have been Walgreens, I guess. I just remember there were two or three American bases that were bombed. One of my friends, her dad was head of the Army ROTC at University of Puerto Rico. He wasn't allowed off base at all because independentistas had his picture and he was marked for, assassination. So it was a violent time there. And yet I loved it there. I got really into snorkeling, and even though I was only 13, I got my scuba diving license. I just loved the environment there. We kept on going to church, even though there was a chapel on base. My parents were very Southern Baptist, and we went off base to a Southern Baptist church. And that's when I started having discord, with the Southern Baptist religion. And then my father started having some problems with work, and instead of staying longer, we ended up getting shipped to Albany, Georgia, which was a horrendous place to live. Very, very incredibly conservative. The military base was literally on the wrong side of the tracks there. And the schools on that side were horrible. The first 6 weeks we lived there, my mom and my dad was coming later. We lived on the right side of the town, and I went to a school that was pretty good. It kind of, you can see the nature of the times in that that was 1971. Every day we started off with prayer and Pledge of Allegiance at that school. But then when my dad got there, we moved to the base, and um, I changed schools, and it was just really a horrible school. It was a horrible school, and there I started seeing what happens in many times when military kids get into a lot of trouble because, for one thing, their parents are frequently gone. You move a lot. Often there's not a lot of boundaries. And I became part of that. One of my best friends got pregnant, like how old were we? It's eighth grade, ninth grade. We were in ninth grade then. It was a horrible place, really horrible. And, I got into trouble also. And then, we hung out with sailors. In the summer, we went to the pool every day, and sailors, we hung out with some of the sailors. I mean, think of it this way. I was, 14 or something. The sailors were often just 17 or 18, so like in terms of years, they're not that much older than us. But, of course, they were adults and stuff. And so, whereas in Puerto Rico, the abuse of my family had kind of eased off. It was horrible in Albany, and I just hated it. And, we all wanted to get out of there. Everybody who was there wanted to get out. So my dad was getting out of the Navy and decided to retire to Orlando. They did not want to go back to West Virginia. And I lived there for high school. This was during Nixon's second election against McGovern. And the high school I went to, it's called Oak Ridge High, was in what had been an area next to around an Air Force base. If you've ever flown to Orlando, that airport used to be an Air Force SAC base. Okay, and so the military gave it up, and the city took it over. But my high school was like the closest one to that, and so it was very Air Force and pretty conservative and stuff. I really liked the high school, and it was oriented towards kids who did well in math and science. And I did well in math and science, although, I mean, ironically, what I really enjoyed was social science, but they had the system set up so that if you did well in school, you were shifted into what's called a math science research block. So I ended up with, 5 or 6 years of physics and chemistry and 5 or 6 years of math in high school. And not all that much social science, which I really loved. I mean, the highlight of my high school was and I'm looking at Gail when I say this because I know she's done stuff like this. My world history teacher did a simulation where we acted out the Nuremberg war crimes trials, and everybody had their own part. I was one of the, I guess I was one of the prosecuting attorneys. And it was a wonderful experience, very immersive, and just everybody learned a whole lot. It was just really meaningful. And I got involved in the environmental action group there. And I had wonderful teachers who took us camping on weekends, who took us canoeing. I remember one spring break, we took a 5-day canoeing trip down the Peace River. I got really involved in environmental stuff. And I just loved it. It was just lots of fun. So I had my very first job when I lived in Orlando, and I had been taking piano lessons since I was in, I don't know, first or second grade. And I started teaching piano as a job. And I also worked in summers with the Youth Conservation Corps for the Forest Service. And, we spent the summer away and living in the forest. And I have some slides and stuff later. I'll show you some of the stuff we did. But I love that experience. It got me out of my family, and I met other people who would say things to me like, your family is really not like everybody else's family. It was very reality based. I mean, people said to me, not everybody is as strict as your parents are. And I still am good friends with people that I was in YCC with. Um, and and it was tremendous. It was tremendous confidence booster. I mean, we built a shade tree nursery. One summer, we planted 40,000 pine seedlings. We built a bridge. And it was just a wonderful experience. And my camp was all female. And so, which I think was a good thing because we didn't have people, everybody really got in and worked. I mean, we learned safe ways to wield an axe and do all kinds of things. I mean, I couldn't find these pictures, but one thing I remember is we had a week where we were the ones setting controlled burns to try to keep fires from burning in the forest. So that was really, I loved it. I really loved it a lot. So I went to University of Florida for my BA. And because of that experience, I started off as a forestry major. And I rapidly realized after my first course that it really tells you how to best log trees. And I decided I didn't want to do that. And I was interested in environmental stuff. I switched around a bunch of other things, and I ended up as basically a kind of urban planning degree, interdisciplinary urban studies and environmental studies. And, I'm going to talk about some of this in more detail, as part of my political awakening. But, I was really active and head of our environmental action group. And I was in Young Democrats and very active with Democratic politics. I was on the Democratic County Committee. And I started coming out in my mind anyway as gay. I started realizing, I was gay. I'll say one thing about my time as president of Young Democrats that, to kind of show you what the politics was like at the time. My roommate was president of College Republicans. And she took me to my first gay bar. And we are still friends today. So it was a time, Florida was very different then than it was now. Florida was very progressive, particularly environmentally and in terms of planning, light years ahead of California at that time anyway. And there were, coming from Miami, there were a bunch of younger progressive office holders, who really changed things in the state. The Republican Party was almost non-existent in the state at that time. And, this was in, 75 to 79. It started changing really in the next decade, where it wasn't that Republicans got elected. It was that those Democrats, there was always a very conservative wing of Democrats. They changed parties, and then people started getting elected as Republicans. So, and then I served as volunteer coordinator on a political campaign, and I'll get back to that. But that was a life-turning event, a life-changing event. I left there to go to South Florida to get my master's in public administration. It was a special master's in public administration with an emphasis in environmental and growth management. And so again, it was like the urban planning kind of stuff that I was really interested in. And I did things like I was an intern at West Palm Beach County Planning Department, notable today for being just across the the causeway from Trump's Mar-a-Lago. And then after that year, I was accepted to a special program called the Presidential Management Fellowship. And I went to DC and worked for HUD in a program where we were encouraged to spend shorter periods of time working for other agencies to get a broader experience. And so while I was there, I also worked in the Florida Governor's Office of Planning and Budgeting, and also in a regional planning office. At HUD, the office I was in was the office that funded regional planning agencies. And those are agencies like ABAG here, the Association of Bay Area Governments, which works on regional issues like transportation, like earthquake safety, like climate change. Um, and when I started there, Carter was president. But then I was there when Reagan became president. And in Reagan's first budget, he zeroed out our program. And nobody at HUD even knew it for weeks. Because this was the budget, someone might remember, where they passed it so fast that people's phone numbers were written in the margins still. And it decimated HUD and it decimated EPA. So a lot of people who were in the program I was in, HUD and EPA, left. And I had already figured out that I wanted to go on and study public policy at a PhD level. And so I had a faculty member who was going to Arizona State, and she arranged for me to go with her and get some fellowship money. And so I went earlier rather than what I was planning on doing, which was going later. My parents hated the idea. You know, my parents were the Depression generation, where if you were in a job, you should stay in that job because it was a good paying job. No matter that, I hated working for the federal government. I just hated it. At HUD, what that meant is that I only ever really had anything to do with other federal employees or state employees. You never actually talked to real people, and getting anything done, it would take like 3 weeks to get a letter sent out. And I just hated it. So there was like no chance that I was going to hang out and, you know, be a federal employee the rest of my career. You know, and my mom was like, you know, you're getting paid decent money, you know, for the time. You know, you need to stay, you need to stay. And they just didn't understand the concept of hate my job, don't want to spend the rest of my life doing something I hate, you know? And so, you know, that was quite a conflict, but I did it. I mean, I moved to Tempe, and they had a new political science PhD program that was supposed to be applied. And so I started there. You know, I think in terms of my personal life, you know, I met somebody there. We had, a relationship for a while. But that didn't last. And I knew that, one interesting thing is that we were born on the same day. So, you know, what are the chances of that? I mean, we were exactly the same age. But the program, the poli-sci program, was not what they advertised. So I transferred back to Florida State, which I knew I could get into and could get money in and after spending a summer in Ann Arbor at a camp on statistics. It's people from all over the country go to spend time there to learn statistics and research methods. And I already had figured out that I knew I needed to get a job and be able to support myself. And that one thing that's always in demand are people who do budgeting and people who can do statistics and teach statistics and budgeting. And so, you know, as a graduate student, I took like 42 units of statistics, and I took all the budgeting classes and stuff, and you know, got a lot of experience in that. So I moved back to Tallahassee and, you know, got into the political science and public policy program there. I worked as a research assistant to some of the biggest names in public policy who were there, and it was really a good experience. I also worked there as a consultant. I did survey research work there. My my department never knew it, but on the side, I also worked as administrative assistant at the spouse abuse shelter there, um, on the side. So one thing that had happened in Gainesville is I started working for the spouse abuse shelter there, and so I connected as a way of making friends and having some connection beyond the university. I worked. I became a volunteer at the spouse abuse shelter there, and this was a time, you know, it's very different than what you would do if you were a volunteer now. This shelter also was a rape crisis center, and we would carry a beeper for a whole day. And if if we got a call from a rape survivor, we would literally go to the hospital with them, and we were trained as paraprofessionals. Basically, we would go to the hospital with them and stay with them while they had their exam, and continue to support them, through their healing. And even more, I mean, what was really dangerous is that if you have, if you got a call from a woman who was, being abused, you would go with and meet them someplace and then take them to the shelter. And, I remember one family, meeting one family who were so terrified. The dad was something in organized crime, and they had come from Gainesville and had made it in like 2 hours, and that's a 4-hour drive. And they were so terrified. And it now I think you would not have paraprofessionals doing that kind of direct service. It would be there would be more distance, and definitely more staff doing that rather than volunteers. But I met, one of my best friends there, and I continued doing that kind of work, different places that I, have lived. So it was very meaningful to me. Let's see, where am I? So I got my PhD there in political science. My fields were public policy, public administration, statistics, and American politics. My dissertation was on Cuban political development in Miami, which I won't start talking about because I'm still fascinated by it, and I could talk quite a while on it. But I spent a lot of time in Miami because of that, gathering data and stuff. And Miami is still a favorite place of mine. My dissertation chair said, your first job, out of school, don't worry about it. Just take the first job you get and go and finish your dissertation. So I interviewed at University of Alabama at Birmingham. I got offered the job on the interview. I liked the people a lot. And so I took that job, and so I moved to Birmingham. And I lived there for 5 years. I was in a department of public administration and political science. It was a small department, 10 people. One thing that was very unusual is that of 10, 4 of us were gay, 2 women and 2 men. And so I was very comfortable there, even though Birmingham is a very, one thing that happens in the South is college towns like Athens, Georgia, New Orleans, Birmingham, people who are progressive from around the rest of that state all like migrate to those central towns, to Birmingham, to New Orleans, to Athens. And so Birmingham itself actually reminds me a lot of Oakland, very, very progressive. But you're still in Alabama. And this was before AIDS was started, and before the gay rights community really was organized there. And I was there during the AIDS epidemic, and and helped start the first AIDS action organization, an AIDS service organization, and served as treasurer for quite a long time there. And uh, walked in the first gay pride parade, which was absolutely terrifying to do, in Birmingham, thinking that, anybody sees you, you're going to get fired. The university, not a great thing, because it started as a medical school outreach, out something, from University of Alabama, and it maintained that kind of medical model, very top down structure. The president was always a doctor, and so if you were in another part of the university, it wasn't a great place to be. Very, very top down. Faculty really didn't have any kind of role at all, or any kind of shared governance at all. And I really had only ever intended to work there a year or two. And, I ended up in year 5. There was a big scandal in my department where our department chair was serially dating women students in, whatever department he was in. He was already on his 3rd wife, and they'd all been his students. And one of my students came to me and told me that, had a relationship with her. And it became a very serious situation. He was somebody who was very progressive, and the university and people supported him. He spread it around that myself and the other woman in our department, that the dykes were out to get him. And both of us ended up having to get attorneys. And he lost his job, however, because it was true. And in fact, his wife left him after she read the student's deposition, and realized there were things that she knew that she could only have known if she had slept with him. But it really meant that last year, in Birmingham, was just truly horrible, truly, truly horrible. And it is, I'm going to go into more depth, but this is where I got involved with Quakers, and their support really got me through. It was a difficult time, but it was very much a time of growth for myself also. I did leave at that point, and I was looking for another place to go. My decision rules: where do I want to live? Where do I want to live? One job I applied to was in Louisville, but one of my best friends was there in that department, and I could have been there with him. One was in Arizona, in Tempe, Arizona State. I didn't like Tempe. I did not like living in the desert. So I picked this job. This job happened to be in public administration, not in political science. And so I moved here. In 91. And so I've lived here 32 years. I think this is my 32nd year. I started out living in Oakland. And then I met Marissa at our meeting, at a meeting that Julia Bazar held for people who were gay in the meeting. And it's very telling that at that time, we were all afraid for anybody in the meeting to know that we were gay. We didn't want anybody to know we were going to this meeting. It was a different time. People were not open. Nobody felt like they could be open. So I met Marissa. We, at that meeting, I think the next day we went with her dog and we went out to Point Reyes. And we moved in together, I think 94, 95 in Kensington. Our wedding, which was held under the care of the meeting, was in 97. We just had our 25th wedding anniversary. And then we adopted Gabriella in 1998. So I'm going to show some more slides now, and then that maybe would be a good time after that to take a break, because that's kind of the end of my chronology. And then I'll kind of talk about themes, after this. So let me just show you the rest of the family situation. Let's see. Okay. So here's kind of family after being here in the Bay Area and meeting Marissa and our family together, developing. So here's on the left in the blue nightgown is Marissa's mom, Irene. Wonderful person, so supportive of me and Marissa, just really wonderful. There you see on Gabriella's lap is one of my Aunt Nellie's Afghans. And then my mother, sitting on the other side of Gabriella. And then I know this picture is really quite blurry, but you have a picture of Irene with Gabriella and Marissa and me. Here are other pictures of the family. Gabriella with her cousin Harrison. Harrison is the son of Marissa's sister Janice, who's in the middle picture with the gray hair next to Gabriella. This is one of Gabriella's graduation shots. And the woman in the blue is an in-law, of Janice, a wonderful person named of Joy. And behind Gabriella is the mother of Gabriella's half-brother, who it turned out lived in the Bay Area. And we have spent time with them over the years. Then over on the other side is Janice, her sister, with our two nephews, Harrison and Elliot. Here are pictures of the three of us. One thing we like to do is travel. And here, actually, the one with the Christmas tree is just down at Union Square. And the other one, I think, is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Here's us again. We went to, I don't remember. It was the Jewish comedy Christmas celebration in Chinatown. And then Marissa and I in the UK, on one of our tours of the UK. And then this is Gabriella's half-brother, Jacob, who is 2 years younger than her. And, before COVID, our families would get together, like their birthdays are only like a month apart. And so we would get together for the kids' birthdays and stuff. They have a lot of things in common. They kind of like the same kind of music. Since we haven't really seen them much, since COVID hit. But their family was so open and welcoming to us. And it was really wonderful to be able to see all of them. I mean, we were included in their like extended family gatherings, and it was just great that they got to know each other, and to know that they had a sibling in the world. Okay, so that is the end of that, and I'm going to stop sharing. Yes, so perhaps we can take a break now, Barb, if that's
Sure,
okay.
yeah. Now that we've got you in California and with
Yes,
Marissa.
now I'm in California. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and stop for like 5 minutes and then come back.
That's good. Okay.
Good. We'll see you all back in a few minutes. Thank you. And I wanted to thank Donna for her help. You're doing a great job. All right, we're back. Let's do it.
Okay. So, what I'd like to talk about next are the events in my life that were turning points for me. The first has to be moving to Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was eye-opening to, a kid who had grown up, middle class, non-diverse area. not only did I not at that time speak Spanish, although I spoke it okay and could read and stuff by the time we left, but my eyes were open to two things that really kind of activated me, kind of a political awakening. And one was became very clear to me the role that the United States had played in the history of Puerto Rico. And one reason it was clear was that it was literally in our history books. We took Puerto Rican history, and I mean, I don't think they certainly some people wouldn't allow this at this point in the books, but it was actually pretty laid out. It's like, yes, the U.S. came in and took over Puerto Rico. They kind of portrayed it as the benefits of having done that, and that Puerto Rico had the highest of uh, uh, what would you call it? The highest living situation in all of South and Central America. Puerto Ricans didn't pay federal taxes, but it was clear that the U.S. came in and colonized Puerto Rico. And so I became, ultra aware of this. I became, you know, drove my mother nuts because I became political, and I was very critical of the U.S. and what the U.S. was doing here or there, became vocal about that. The other thing was, for the first time, I really observed real serious poverty, and it was often hidden in the more middle class areas. But for instance, when you would drive to Old San Juan, literally over the cliff, there would be all of these little tin huts, like with tin roofs and stuff. And the poverty, even if Puerto Rico had a much higher, living situation than the rest of the South America, it was very poor. And so I really, I had my eyes opened, to that reality, and became very aware of how entitled I was, and how privileged I was. So when we then moved to Albany, Georgia, and one side of the river had good schools, and the other side of the river, where African Americans lived and where the naval base was, had horrible schools, that just kind of accentuated, my political awakening. And I wrote a paper in that year for school on how bad the school was, and got brought into the principal's office and stuff. And I just pointed out that the math classes were like 6 to 8 weeks behind the math class I was in at the beginning of the year, and they were all behind where we were in Puerto Rico at my school there. And of course, they didn't appreciate any of that. Um, and so I really got my eyes opened. You would drive around. This was 72 or so, and you could still see signs of you know colored colored water fountains, colored bathrooms and stuff in the rural areas. All that stuff was still there. I mean, it wasn't being used anymore, but it was still present. You could still see it. Um, so it was just very, very eye opening, and I think led to me having my eyes opened even more and more. Um, as when the next event in my life that was a big turning point was the Youth Conservation Corps, and I participated the summer after my 10th grade year and after my 11th grade year, and then I was a counselor after my freshman year in college. Um, well, that first year was the summer of 73, and that was the summer it was either that summer or the next summer, the summer of the Watergate hearings. And we were not, what we would do is, we lived in like barracks in one part of the the U.S. forest, the national forest, and then we would go out during the day in big trucks, and then we would come back. But we weren't allowed television or anything. But they knew I was interested in the Watergate hearings, so they let me watch at night. And this is where I got politically born. I looked at those Watergate hearings, and unlike many others who took away from it, government is corrupt and horrible and we should be anti-government, I saw people like Barbara Jordan and Elizabeth Holtzman, being brave, and all of those members of the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate committees, putting their careers on the line, for, against, what Nixon was doing. And I was like, wow, these people are amazing. I want to be like them. And Barbara Jordan remains one of my big heroines. In fact, one of our student awards at San Francisco State is named the Barbara Jordan Award. And what is so disappointing to me is that students today have no idea who she is. But so I have to tell them, it's like, Barbara Jordan, are you kidding me? But anyway, I mean, for those of you who might not know, Barbara Jordan was the first black woman elected to the Texas House since Reconstruction, and then to the U.S. House since Reconstruction, and finished up her career as a specialist and author on ethics in the public administration program at University of Texas at Austin. And so, that was really eye-opening, as well as, what I already kind of alluded to, that my friends there were really kind of open with me that, what I was used to wasn't exactly what, normal, in my family life. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And, I was able to make people who became lifelong friends, even though we disagreed. I mean, one of my still very close friends there was diehard Nixon, and of course I wasn't. And we made it through that, and are still really close. And boy, when Trump got elected, I thought, oh no, here we go again. Beth is gonna like Trump. Well, she hates Trump, so that has been quite a relief. So that was really wonderful. Let's see. Then when I was in Gainesville, as an undergraduate student, I became volunteer coordinator for a state house campaign for a woman named Marianne Sherman, who had been a statewide officer in the League of Women Voters. And that was an incredible experience. I spent at least a year and a half on that campaign, and I traveled all over the district with her and organized all the, the phone calling and everything. What was really important to me was Gainesville had been the center of feminist activity in the Southeast. Gainesville and Athens, in the 60s and 70s, and all of that was still there, so an incredible feminist community there. Also an incredible lesbian feminist community there. There was a great women's bookstore. Well, those women all came out for Marianne's campaign. So I met and was kind of mentored by these women who had been fighting these fights for years. In Florida, the big fight was still the ERA campaign. In fact, after Marianne's campaign was over, we went directly into the very last ERA campaign, which we lost. But it was great. And the fact that they were so generous with me of their time and mentored me, really, really helped me because, as someone who was a Southern Baptist, I had a hard time coming out as gay. I had internalized all of that horrible fire and brimstone. You're going to spend the rest of, your existence in hell. I had a really hard time, and so it was really important that I was able to meet um, women who felt good about themselves, had productive careers and relationships. It was just really important. So that was an incredible turning point for me. We won the primary, and then lost the general by 180 votes to the man who would become the Speaker of the Florida House. And it was particularly important because they were the machine and they were always supposed to win. So the fact that we actually won in the primary shocked everybody. Um, so that was really important. And then when I was in Birmingham, I had a close friend in Tallahassee who killed herself. And it really shocked my system and shocked my soul to a great extent. Where for those of you who might have had the misfortune of being around somebody who's killed themselves, um, everybody is everybody feels guilty, everybody feels horrified. You never know why. You never know if you could have done something different. It's just a horrible experience, and it it was really important that it's the reason I stayed longer in Birmingham. I found a great therapist and I was able to really work through a lot of stuff that wouldn't have come up unless I had been like shaken, like taken by the neck and just shaken up and down. And so hard lessons, but it was a growing experience, and but a horrible one all along. So let me talk a bit about my spiritual path. And so obviously I was raised Southern Baptist. We were very into it. Our family was very into it. Not only had my great grandfather been a minister, but I mean, literally in West Virginia, the church was right across the street. All members of my family were all very involved. And what that meant is that you went Sunday morning, you went Sunday evening, and you went Wednesday nights. But I was born again when I was 8 years old. What you talk about in a evangelical church is you go down to the front of the church. At the end of the service, there's an invitation. Anybody who wants to, be born again, come down front. I did that, and I did it again in high school. And then I hated it because I realized in high school I was being caught by the fear. I was being caught by the fear, the fire and brimstone. And we see it today in evangelicals and how they've turned religion into one that's based on fear and scaring people. And I got over it quickly after that time in high school. And I left any kind of religion for a while. I tried out other experiences. I tried out Unitarians, and it wasn't for me. It felt like I was at school. It felt overly intellectualized. And I realized I already over intellect everything. And I was trying to connect to my feelings and to my soul. And so I didn't want that experience. And the other thing I realized is that I felt very traumatized from my experience in as a Southern Baptist. I still to this day really dislike and have a a deep reaction against anybody preaching to me, and or being preached at or preached to. It feels very controlling to me, and I just can't stand it. Um, so I don't like those kinds of environments. So even something like going to Presbyterian church or something like that, um, I just don't like that. So in grad school, in Tallahassee, another place that is the center of a lot of feminist activity, maybe in large part because Florida State used to be the women's teacher college, so it has that culture. Um, I um, I found a community of feminists there, some lesbian, some not, and they were involved in goddess worship and like kind of quasi paganist. And I had always felt closest to a spirit when I was, in outside in nature in the woods. So this had some appeal to me. And I've heard many of you all say those same things too. I think it's the way in which many of us connect. Um, but I didn't like being preached at by a woman any more than I like being preached at by a man. So even though we had a priestess for a while, I still wasn't very comfortable with it. But we did some cool things, like we had a female only Seder, and we just, people were different religions, and we just kind of mixed it up and did a whole lot of things. Um, and the other thing that was important about Tallahassee is that my roommate got Friends Journal, and I started reading Friends Journal, her Friends Journal. The Tallahassee Quaker meeting was just getting started. And so I would read her journal, and I started talking to her about it. And I never went there. But when I moved to Birmingham, particularly after I had my crisis of my soul with my friend Libby dying, I tried out the Birmingham meeting. And that really, honestly, is what saved me. I mean, I had such deep depression while I was there. And Birmingham's meeting was very small, about 10 people on a great day, almost always completely silent. And the silence there felt like healing waves, just waves of healing energy to me all the time. It over and over again, I would feel that I think the image is from George Fox, where he would say he saw um, uh, something about, I don't know if it was a circle of light and a circle of darkness, and that's what I continue to imagine when I am in stressful times. I imagine an enormous circle right at the water's edge, and the waves coming, and you have darkness and you have light, and the healing waves just lapping over me. And it just, I just felt like I had come home. It felt so totally right for me. Um, and even though it was a small meeting, 4 or 5 of the women, we had a women's group every Sunday night. And one of the women there, Nancy Whitt, had just spent a sabbatical in Boston at a women's theological institute. And we read all kinds of theology and women's theology. Um, it just, I learned so much about it, and it just, again, it felt so right to me. Um, that being a Quaker, I became a Quaker there. I joined the meeting there. The mystical parts really appealed to me. I know we don't talk about them very much, except Carol Mosier often talks about them. And I always listen very carefully when she might have already left. Yeah, but I always listen whenever Carol would talk about her mystical experience. Oh, good, she is here. About her mystical experiences, because I had some too, and I continue to have them, but I'm not very comfortable talking about them. But I started experiencing them there, and I just felt, this is home. This is home. And I would have stayed, except Birmingham is a horrible place to be a gay person. It's a horrible place. Even the people who are gay there have all this internalized homophobia. They're terrified. They can't be open. And, you know, then all the stuff that happened at school, I just couldn't stay. So, that's when I came here. And I tried out different meetings. I went to the San Francisco meetings many times, actually. And I'm not sure. I don't remember ever trying Strawberry Creek. But I came into our meeting, and and Miriam, if she were here, would probably laugh at this, but I looked at that fireplace and just felt at home. And I'm sorry it's gone, but I know the reasons why it had to go. But I just thought, this feels perfect to me. This feels so comfortable to me. I mean, there are times things annoy me, but this, I felt at home, and I feel like I have healed further here. I no longer cringe when I hear people talking using Christocentric language. I can hear that now, where when I first came here, I had a hard time hearing people talk about Jesus or Christ. I can accept that now. I've actually even took one of those FGC workshops on, the historical Jesus. So I've been able to open. I see it as opening myself back up to all possibilities and getting over some of the trauma, I think, from, being raised evangelical. While I was there, twice we went to different Friends General Conferences. And those were great opportunities, because I would just tear into the bookstore and read everything, buy everything I could and read it about Quakers and stuff. And at one of them, and the one in Appalachian State, they actually had a workshop for people who had been brought up evangelical. And that was great. It turned out the one thing that many of us missed was the singing. So we actually had a piano, and everybody sang, the hymns that we were used to hearing, as evangelicals and stuff. So, I feel like spiritually I've continued to grow. There are times when I know I don't put enough effort into it. But I feel like, even though from time to time, things in the meeting frustrate me, I feel like this is a place where, there's openness about being able to go different ways. And there is acceptance about going different ways. And that's important to me. So, I feel like I have progressed along a spiritual path, and, I hope to progress even more. I think, let's see, one more, since I've been here, let's see, I said I've been treasurer here. I've been clerk for 2 years, 2 times, in my second time as clerk of, our Peace and Social Order group. I've been on finance committee for years, and I was clerk of that committee for 7 years. So, so I've been very much, I think, part of the meeting. Marissa and I were married under the care of the meeting. I now see, I used to say I would only see spirit as goddess. And now I more and more think about God, goddess, spirit, or just spirit. So I think I'm still kind of moving on that path. Okay, so one more thing, and that is, my activist path. And a lot of this I've already talked about. So segregated schools until 5th grade, and then, you know, moved to Puerto Rico, my awakening there. In high school, getting very involved with environmental issues and my first political campaigns. Summer of 73, Watergate, that was another awakening. In college, Democratic politics, environmental action group. Then Marion Sherman's campaign was a big awakening. And what I should have said is that after our campaign lost, that's when I shifted to the ERA campaign. We are on the last possible chance for Florida to pass it. And if Florida had passed it, then the ERA would have gotten into the Constitution, and we weren't able to pull it off. What I did at that point was shift into the spouse abuse shelter, as the volunteer coordinator. And so my activism shifted from environmental stuff to more feminist stuff at that point. And so I volunteered at the spouse abuse shelter, which was also a suicide hotline in Birmingham. When I moved here, I was on the board of Woman Inc., which was the spouse abuse hotline in San Francisco. And, I've continued. I took out a long time off when Gabriella was small, and then up through really, her middle school at least, and didn't do a lot of activities. But, since she kind of got through high school, throughout, I was involved in various activities. I remember going to a death penalty vigil with Nancy. I can't think of people's last names anymore. Went to Las Vegas a couple times with Carol and Gail, and we got arrested, for the nuclear testing, and I panicked when we were adopting Gabriella because we had to declare, any felonies, and I knew I hadn't gotten. They had never, we hadn't been tried, but, we had to say if we'd been arrested. And I was like, oh my gosh, but that turned out okay. And I've been involved, in AFSC committees for a long time. And now I'm on the board program committee in Philadelphia. I have so appreciated Friends Committee on National Legislation and our advocacy team, which we've now had for 6 years. And I'm on now the policy committee for that. And so, I have, I appreciate politics. I haven't always been involved in party politics anymore. That stopped when I moved to HUD because of the Hatch Act. You're not allowed to be, do party politics. Or campaigns. You can do campaigns. It's very limited. So that I got away from that, and mostly have been doing environmental, spouse abuse, and some peace work, and then whatever FCNL is working on. And right now I have been working more and more on climate change, and that's what I hope to continue on. So I wanted to say a few words about my professional career, and just say kind of, topics I've been interested in, work I've done. I started off in urban politics. I told you my dissertation was Cuban political development in Miami, and I'm still fascinated by that, but it's not what I got a job here. And I wanted to move here, so I took a job in public administration. And that turned my research, aside from the fact that it was just not practical to be so far from Miami and, and try to do work there. So I got more involved in urban administration, like city management issues, and budgeting issues, and technology in cities. I was one of the first people who did research on e-government, which is putting governments online. And I've continued that track. So I've worked on technology in cities, and how some of that technology is enhancing or reducing equity in cities, And that's where I'm trying to continue at this point and am continuing at this point. It's kind of ironic that the AFSC project on militarized equipment that Barb is very active in and Wendy Alfson is active in. One reason that I was so interested in it is that it's pretty much exactly in line with the research that I have done before, literally technology in cities and how it impacts, society there. So at San Francisco State, which I loved, San Francisco State has a mission of social justice. It also is 180-degree difference from University of Alabama Birmingham in that there is a very high degree of faculty involvement and shared governance. So it was going from one extreme in Birmingham to the other extreme here, and I just loved it here. I got very involved in my program, the Masters of Public Administration program, and I was the chair for 15 years. And helped develop the program from a tiny one into like a mid-level, mid-sized program that's highly regarded around the state. We are a majority minority program. We've got about 40% Asian students, 20% Hispanics, African American about 10%, and Anglos about 30%. So very diverse student body. Our students are wonderful. They work for their community. They're advocates, and they're going out and working for government agencies and working for nonprofit agencies and making a difference. So, it really felt like our program is making a difference. Our faculty has got, we have 5 core faculty, 4 are women, which is unheard of in the field of public administration. And 60% are faculty of color, also unheard of in public administration. And then on campus, I got very involved in the academic senate and helped develop policies to protect the faculty, and then kind of develop specialties in curriculum development and budgeting. So you can see the theme that all along, I've tried to build expertise in budgeting and research over time, both to stay relevant and to make sure I could always get a job, and I think it has kind of worked. So let me just show one slide of my colleagues and some students. Whoops. There we go. So here we have colleagues. We went to a baseball game together, at a student dinner together, at commencement with some of my favorite colleagues. You can see some of the students. So we've got great faculty and great students, and they are really a joy to teach. I never realized when I went back to grad school, because I loved to do research. That was just so much fun. And then I found I loved to teach, and I really appreciate our students, and it's just great to engage them. So that is another thing. And then just to kind of finish off, just kind of a quick what I like to do kind of thing. Best thing I ever did, and I did it with Marissa, and that is having Gabriella. Totally changed my life, all in wonderful, wonderful ways. And doing this process, preparing for this, just made me realize just how much having her in our lives just has enriched it so much. I think we're very proud of her and what she's achieving and the path she is making for herself as a young woman, having to overcome a lot of challenges. It's just a privilege to see her grow and to spend time with her. I mean, by far my favorite thing to do is spend time with her and with Marissa. So that's always fun. My heroes, Barbara Jordan and Lillian Hellman. Um, and let's see, I'm going to share again to show another slide. See if this will work. Our animals, particularly after Connie's very poignant talk, message last week. I went back and counted up, and I have had, let's see, well, 4 dogs and 7 cats over my life. When Marissa and I moved in together, we had a blended family. She had a cat and dog, and I had 2 cats. We had to bring those together. So I don't have pictures of all of them, but the one in the upper left-hand corner is our dog Rosie, who died about 1.5 years ago. The lower right-hand corner is our current cat, Tangerine. My first dog is in the upper right-hand corner with my mom holding him when we were in Puerto Rico. You could see Heather, who was Marissa's dog, in the middle top part. My very first cat is in the middle bottom. That's Lily, named after Lillian Hellman. Then in the box is BJ for Barbara Jordan. And then the black cat is Karina, who we got from somebody else. So, and our animals are a wonderful part of our family and always have been. I can't imagine a time without having, these animals. They just enrich in our lives so much. And then I was going to talk about the things I like to do. I like to go to the movies, particularly Gabriella and I like to go to the drive-in. Marissa doesn't so much like the drive-in, but we go fairly often. Here we have, Gabriella and I panning for gold in Alaska, and her in the snow. I used to take her to the snow all the time. We're really into Halloween and decorating for Halloween, and she and her friend Amanda are ice skating. I love going snorkeling and here we go. Snorkeling, and we just got back from Hawaii, and I went snorkeling with her sister Janice and had a wonderful time. I love to read. I read I read a lot of mysteries and history and politics and spy novels. I like to watch basketball, women or men's. I like basketball. I'm sorry, I just like it. I've always liked Star Trek. Ever since I was a kid in Puerto Rico, and the only thing that we could do on Saturday and Sundays afternoon, the movies were free, and they had an hour of Star Trek and an hour of Mission Impossible every day. And I've always liked those 2 shows because of that. And I like to actually do holiday baking. That's fun. And then let's see, I'm going to share my screen one more time. My favorite artist is Joan Baez. I have been to so many Joan Baez concerts, I can't even keep track. From everything from an enormous 90-person stadium tour to a small little practice in a church over in San Francisco. I love Joan Baez. And then I was just going to show people kind of about Youth Conservation Corps. So in Ocala National Forest, the kind of thing we would do would be we would clear trails like this one on the left. This is the beginning of the Appalachian Trail. You might recognize in the top right-hand corner, I used to have this as my screen background. That's Juniper Springs, and the bridge we built was right behind this. This is a natural spring that was bricked in by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression. And we used to go there during lunch and jump in. It's very cold. But this is a wonderful place. And then the other spring is Alexander Spring. Those are two big recreation areas in the Ocala National Forest. So we spent a lot of time there. And this other picture was what we would have to wear. We had to wear hard hats all the time and gloves. We had work boots and jeans. And then when we were using axes, we had to have shin guards. And one thing I learned from the Forest Service is safety. We had to take salt pills because of dehydration. At the beginning of every summer, we took this gross tasting stuff that was supposed to protect us against poison ivy. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. We competed with one another who was going to work the hardest. And so I think that's it. I think that is it. Oh, and my favorite movie, Sound of Music. Absolutely. So I know that's been a whirlwind tour through my life. I hope it wasn't too fast, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. What I'll do is put it on gallery view for me and see if anybody wants to either wave at me or raise their hand and ask a question. And if you'll just unmute and then put yourself back on mute, and we'll see what people have to ask. The best way to raise your hand is to go to reactions at the bottom of your page, and there is a little raise hand bar, and that way your picture comes to the top.
It's also okay if there are no questions. Oh, you know what? I know. I see Marilyn, and I realized that meant I missed a slide.
Oh.
Huh. Where did it go?
Well, I have a question.
Huh,
While you're
sorry.
looking.
Yeah.
So, Jeannie, I know you told me that you've been coming to our meeting for a long time. Do you have any memories of some of our Quaker friends that are no longer with us?
Yes, I do. And I think, my computer shut down at one point when I was working on this, and that must have been why I lost this slide, but I had an image of, so I will find it. Hold on. Sorry.
Take your time.
Here it is. Certainly Leslie Preston, who is actually in this someplace.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, maybe she's off to the side in this one. These were the rallies and stuff at around the beginning of the Trump administration. I think I must have two of those images, and the other one has Leslie. And I think, well, I must have lost that other one because I have a good image, Marilyn, of us in at a here we go, lobby visit, but I can't find it right now. Yeah, so I so totally miss Leslie. And Bob Jolly and Bick. So many people. I think of the meeting house in those early days when I was first coming, and I don't remember her name, but there was a woman who always brought a little dog and sat with it on her lap. Margaret would probably know. So that was always very cool. And George's mom, Claire. I went to pick up Claire. This is when Peace and Social Order met on Sunday evenings, and I always would pick up Claire and then take her home. Um, and she was a big part of those Peace and Social Order meetings. And I remember, Sandra. I remember, one of those meetings, which was on 4th of July, and afterwards we went down to the marina and watched the fireworks. That was
Wow.
fun. Um, Barbara Graves. She was not from our meeting, but I remember, being in Las Vegas with her. At the
Hmm.
nuclear tests, and and so she was clerk to committee for AFSC, and you know, Barbara Graves intimidated me no end. I mean, the woman, got a bronze star, for her work, and gave it back. I just, the kind of life that I would just hope to emulate and come close to. She was amazing, really amazing. So many people, uh, in our meeting who have come and gone. Also not from our meeting, but Stephen McNeil, who recently passed on. Just wonderful people. Laura Magnani, who was at our meeting. Uh, Richard, when Marissa and I first moved in together, Richard was our house cleaner. He would come and clean house for us.
Richard who? Richard
I'm blank. I can't think of
Berryman?
what. What? Berryman. Berryman. Yes.
I think Donna has a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Thanks. Jeannie, can you also stop your screen share just so we can see you again? Um,
Sorry. Yes, I
thank,
forgot. Yes, there we
that's
go.
okay. Thanks. My question is, you mentioned the importance of the women's group that you had
Mm.
at the Quaker meeting, and I'm wondering if you've ever seen that somewhere else. Is there a model for that of how that might look at Berkeley meeting now, or?
Well, we did it. We did it here. Yeah. We did it for about I don't know how many years, but Catherine Anderson was in it. Gail was in it. Miriam was in it. We would meet at people's house once a month. Marissa was in it. And we would do some kind of reading and have dinner. I think we had dinner too, maybe not. Um, and we would do some kind of reading. Um, and it involved people who were not necessarily central to the meeting. So there were a couple of people who were part of that group, who I felt good about because it pulled them into the meeting in some sort. Uh, uh, Nybro Stevens, I'm blanking her first name. She was part of that.
Carol? Yeah.
Carol Nybro Stevens, yes, was part of that. It must have lasted maybe 2 or 3, 4 years. I remember Catherine talking about it soon before she died. Yeah, talking about that women's group. So absolutely, I think it would work. And I have heard that there are other kind of groups that have come and gone. A men's group from time to time. That comes and goes and stuff. I think it was a great experience. And um, I think that group was not as interested in the in-depth reading that the group in Birmingham was. Um, and then, of course, you've got the history groups, right? The reading group that's been on Tuesday nights pre-COVID that I was never able to be part of because I normally taught on Tuesday nights. But then the Sunday night kind of Sioux Friday groups, those, were heavy duty reading articles and stuff. But that group was wonderful. and I think many of us encouraged Sue to do it through COVID. I mean, that's when we would have needed it, like have something like that to pull us together. But because of her hearing issue, she didn't want to try the Zoom. So yeah, I think that would be cool to try.
Thank you. And I also wanted to give Fred and Sandra a chance to ask a question.
I think I already said something.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just sort of have a comment. What I'm struck with all of what you've said is the tremendous amount of energy you've put into all of the phases of your life. And I mean, there have been so many things and so much energy, and it kind of makes me tired just listening to it. Anyway, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I feel tired now. I definitely feel tired. Yeah.
And our daughter Kimberly is 50 years old tomorrow.
Mm.
No, Monday.
On Monday. So
Marvelous.
we've been spending a lot of time with her, and even more shameful for Fred, she's been taking care of us a lot, especially since I've been recovering from conditions that I can't get rid of because it involves a break and a.
Well, I think that's great that she's taking care of you some.
I think so too. I'm so proud of her. And she's so.
It's time for that to happen, right?
Yeah, but I told her I would like it if she could have a wonderful, comfortable hotel room to rent for 3 hours on her birthday.
Ah, yeah.
One that had a pool. And she said, I would like that too.
Thank you, Sandra. I see Carol. Did you have your hand up? Carol and Nelson?
No, we were just we thought our hand was up. But that was Sandra's screen that was up. But yeah, just my appreciation for everything that Genie has told us about her life. I learned so much, and I appreciate all the different avenues that Genie has gone down, some of which I have shared with her.
Yes, and I have much appreciated those. I saw Patricia's hand up.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Margaret's hand, yeah.
I don't know if I got the electronic hand up, but I tried. Well, I just want to say how much I appreciate your story, Genie. I've heard from you lots of these fragments, but it was really nice to hear it all put together and see.
Well, thank you. Yes, thanks.
I just want to mention there's even more that Genie does in our meeting. She does lots of simple little things like the website. If anyone needs an announcement on the website, Genie does it. It's just, oh, it's easy. And she's provided support in our meeting with the pandemic. She started the support group that some of us still go to. And, it was really nice when Carol and Nelson first moved away, and when Gail moved away, that they continued to have contact with us. And we hope they'll be back. But let's see. Oh, and that group, we had the privilege of being with Catherine Anderson as she was feeling it. It was very touching.
Yeah.
So Genie has really contributed to the emotional, spiritual part of the meeting.
Well, thank you.
Genie.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks.
I agree. We have time for one more. Margaret, please.
I want to say more about what Patricia mentioned, that when the pandemic started, Jeannie had this, what I think was multiple times a week, small group in the evening by Zoom, which has continued and is now every Wednesday evening. And that got me, and I think others, through the pandemic, to have that touchstone way to support us. And I am so grateful for that, and so grateful for everything else you have contributed and for who you are. I know you also are so crucial to Marissa and Gabriella. And we just love you.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. That's really nice. I appreciate that. You know, this reminds me of one more thing, if I could say one more thing. I took it as a gift as my mother was dying. I was on sabbatical. I received a sabbatical and I was able to be with her full time the last 2.5 months of her life. And that was an incredible gift to me because we really finished up, I think, healing our relationship, which we'd begun to heal, you know, with when Gabriella came, and you know, my mother adored Gabriella, and we loved going back and forth and stuff. But you know, I wanted to be sure to say that, you know, my family life wasn't all bad, and you know, my mother and I ended up, you know, with a very good good relationship. And you know, I just wanted to end on that up note, kind of. But I appreciate your support. You know, I've loved being part of this meeting. I love the action and activity in it, and you know, it's a big part of my life. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said I wrote out this outline and realized I didn't have anything in there about my career. You know, I just thought only about Quaker stuff, you know, and I had to go back and think, you know, and so this is an enormous part of my life, and you know, people in this meeting have made it very positive, and you know, I appreciate that. So thank you for coming. I'm very appreciative for your time, and Barb and Donna for your efforts and putting this on.
Well, that's a good way to finish up. Donna, you've been my leader in this whole oral history project, so thank you for doing that. And Jeannie, we love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharing
Thanks.
your life with us.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.